This is a Viva PR podcast.
You can't be inclusive if you're not accessible. Not more work, it's just different work. That means much more meaningful, interesting PR and communications, progress, not perfection. This is about equity of experience, whether morally it's the right thing to do, legally we all have to do it anyway. PR and comms people absolutely are making a difference every single day, quietly getting on with it.
Hello and welcome to PR in the Real World with me, Tony Garner, and today we've got a really fascinating look at accessibility and inclusion in the PR world with our special guest Louise Gibson. Now Louise has been in the public sector world at Sheffield City Council for the last 20 years with a variety of roles, and today she manages a host of social media channels, and she really does know what she's talking about. It's a real interesting look at how we all can make our communications just work that little bit harder if we understand our audiences a little bit better. Let's have a listen. So, Louise, welcome to PR in the Real World.
Thank you for having me and inviting me, Tony. It's nice to be here. Slightly nervous, but also looking forward to it.
Excellent. Well, let's kick off gently then, and if you could share a little bit for the benefit of listeners about your role at Sheffield City Council and the kinds of communication challenges that you and the team are involved in day to day.
Yeah, sure. So my job title is the longest job title in the world. I am the social media design, advertising and sponsorship team manager. In reality, that's 3 teams in one team, perfectly formed. And I'm very lucky. I have an amazing team that I work with day to day. I've been in this specific role for a few years, but had an interest in digital communications prior to that. I've worked in campaigns, I've done a bit of media, a bit of internal comms and private sector before I moved to public sector. So I've got quite a nice rounded experience, and I started my work life at the Mirror in Oldham at the time that Piers Morgan was editor, not in editorial though, in media sales and marketing. So I've done a bit of a mix of stuff, I think it's fair to say. The main day-to-day for me is around social media, and that's the bit I'll kind of focus on today. And I guess day-to-day challenges vary. That's anything from dealing with mis and disinformation, which for anybody in public or private sector will be an increasing problem from people and from bots, which we're seeing on social media. It's understanding behaviour that we see on social media and being able to communicate in a way that is relevant to people who are using lots of different channels in a way that is meaningful. And sounds on the surface of it quite glib and simple, but actually when you delve into any of those starts to get quite complicated. We were talking about using Facebook in team this morning. Molly and my team had been reading an article that talked about how people are using Facebook differently. For those of us who've been on it for a long time, we started off, it was all about connecting with friends and family, and our feed was all about, what our auntie had been doing that day, and your cousin having a really nice meal and putting a picture of it up. And that has completely changed now. And you see that in feeds that are full of groups and advertising, but not really any of the personal stuff. People are using it in a different way. And that's a big challenge for us as communicators, is using corporate channels in the way that we've done in a year, a couple of years, 5 years ago, is not going to bring us the same results as it does now. So it's this ever moving feast of how do you reach people and making sure you're keeping up with the behaviour and you're meeting their needs and you're talking to them in a way that is relatable and meaningful. And that is challenging, but fun. The challenge is part of the fun. I think I would be bored out of my mind if I didn't have that constant movable feast of challenge and behaviour change and all of those great things that go with that.
Interesting. Like you say, it's a fascinating space to be involved in. I really wanted to kind of focus today's episode around accessibility and inclusion, because I know it's become a real focus for yourself. Can you explain why that is and what motivates you?
It's something that has been important to me for years now, but I think increasingly over the last few years, partly for personal reasons. We're, as human beings, we quite often have self-interest in part of our passions and our motivations, and I'm no different. I am deaf. I grew up in a deaf household. My background is a little bit different from a lot of people who work in PR and comms, in that I grew up on a council estate in North Wales. You often hear, and I'm going to shortcut using class, but people in PR and comms often come from middle class background. That's definitely not my experience. And being a woman, and there being touches of neurodiversity in there as well, has meant that I've had some different challenges personally to navigate as part of my experience in the working world. I've been treated differently because of my background. I've been treated differently because of my disabilities. And that has made me very conscious, not just of how those things affect me, but also that other people are being affected in similar and different ways because of barriers that they haven't created. There's a really amazing chap that everybody should follow on LinkedIn called Jamie Shields, and he works in a company called Disabled by Society, and talks about how barriers are built into the society we're in. And that is exactly true of communications. We build in barriers to accessing the PR and the comms that we're putting out without realizing that we're doing it often. So that's where I've come from. And I've realized that as we remove those barriers, and it's actually really easy to do that in the work that we're doing day to day. It's not more work, it's just different work. That means much more meaningful, interesting PR and communications is being engaged with much more positively and just much more. And of course it is, because more people can access it, can understand it, can engage with it, because we've taken the barriers out that essentially would have stopped them being able to do that in the past.
That's really interesting. So you bring this kind of fresh lens, or a different lens, that's informed by your own kind of upbringing and the challenges that you've had to overcome. Why do you think it's kind of overlooked, this idea of accessibility and inclusion in the comms and PR world, and how do you kind of overcome that?
I don't know so much if it's overlooked as much as it was. I mean, it's quite a big question, because I run a training course internally. I've delivered it externally a couple of times as well. And we talk about inclusive language and imagery, and non-inclusive language and imagery that's just part and parcel of how we've all grown up. There's all kinds of language that we use day to day, which isn't particularly inclusive, but we don't realize it's not inclusive. When we tell somebody they just need to man up, that's not inclusive language. That there are all sorts of examples I could go into, but when you think about that, you think about racist language that is built into our everyday, even down to technical terminology. Computer programs or master programs and slave programs. That's absolutely directly racist. Do we consciously think about that day to day? Probably not. I think that's one of the things that I've realized as part of delivering this training and doing this work is I spend time looking for this so that I can create a space which is very much a safe space for people to talk about this, to explore it, and just have that dedicated time to go, oh, wow, I didn't realize that was the case. Yeah. We don't know what we don't know. And I don't think that, certainly in my experience and the people I've talked to about this, people are actively going, well, how can we make our content less accessible and less inclusive? They just don't realize that they're doing that. And that's, they're producing content in good faith without realizing they're building the barriers in. there is definitely an increased appetite, certainly in public sector, to be much more open and embracing of changing the way we're working, which is really fortunate because there is a legal duty for public sector bodies to do that under the Equality Act. So whether morally it's the right thing to do, legally we all have to do it anyway. So there's definitely some motivation there. But people are genuinely, when I deliver this training, they're genuinely really interested in it, and it's helping them to understand the lived experience of other people that they're not ever probably going to experience. And it's that old adage of walking a mile in somebody else's shoes. It helps you understand the human aspect of that and the impact of that, and how small changes can make a big difference to that person whose shoes you just walked in, having a much better experience day to day, having access to the information they need. There's also something here around generational changes that we're starting to see come out. I don't like falling into generational stereotypes too much, and I cover that in my training a little bit as well. But younger generations in particular buying into the values that we have as organisations, and that being about being inclusive and open to everybody. And you can't be inclusive if you're not accessible in your content. One precludes the other. So there's something here about, if we want to reach generations of people and customers, residents who are focused in that way on people having good corporate social responsibility and following those values, accessibility and inclusion has to be at the heart of that. It absolutely does.
And that's fascinating. I think I'd be interested, and I'm sure listeners would, to have a little bit of kind of understanding of the sorts of things you talk about in your training session. Some of like the classic tips and little exercises that you run through there. If you could just peel away that little layer for us, that'd be great.
Okay. I'll give you a couple of takeaways for sure. If you want, just before I do, I wrote a blog for LG Comms. So if you have a search for their website, there's a blog that details some handy how-tos, which I definitely recommend people have a look at.
Right, I'll get Dan to stick it in the show notes so anybody can get the link really quickly.
So some quick tips. Some of the ones that surprise people, emojis. I don't know if you use emojis, Tony, in your kind of day-to-day. I certainly do. I'm kind of at this point just semaphoring with emojis in my messaging. In terms of professional comms, PR, marketing, emojis can be problematic for a number of reasons. I don't know if you've come across any of these before, but emojis for people using screen readers, that will largely be people with visual impairments, but other people use screen readers too. Screen readers, just a bit of text that reads out alternative text that sits behind images, and in the case of emojis, reads out a description of each emoji. So if you imagine you have a social media post which has emojis scattered throughout in the middle of text, at the end used as bullet points, every time that emoji appears, the screen reader is reading it out. Now, there's a great video that I use in the training on YouTube that literally has a screen reader reading it out, and people sit through the training with their faces increasingly going, oh, this is absolutely awful. And you can see them shifting in their seat because it's so uncomfortable. That's the lived experience of people using a screen reader when we scatter emojis through. So, you have, if you would like to take part in this event, a happy face emoji, then sign up at this link here, chain link text. It's that kind of reading it out. It disrupts the flow of the message. It's really clunky and horrible. But emojis are problematic in other ways. People interpret them differently. You can put a picture of an emoji up, and the one I use in the training at the moment is an upside down smiley face, which can be interpreted as it's a smiley face, but it's upside down. It can be interpreted as passive aggressive. as confused, as all kinds of things. So if you're using emojis and people aren't quite sure what you mean, it literally will change the whole tone of what you're saying. And generationally, we're seeing emoji interpretation change as well. There was a trend on TikTok earlier this year with people saying they were Gen Z and specifically asking Gen Xers to stop using the thumbs up emoji because they were interpreting it very differently as a middle finger emoji. Now, I can understand a little bit about why they're doing that in terms of how it looks, because actually, if you look at the two of them on a screen together, shape-wise, they're quite similar. And again, if people are doom scrolling, they'll whiz past quickly. They might misinterpret. But it wasn't just that. It was that they were seeing this as a bit sarcastic. So people going, yeah, really? Rather than, yeah, that's great. So again, it comes down to interpretation, and we can assume when we use these things, it will be seen in a certain way, but it might not be. Neurodiverse people sometimes find emojis really difficult. So there's a whole raft of problems associated with emojis that means their use can be really tricky. They're breaking up text, even in the middle of text. If you're not using a screen reader, then you've got people whose reading attainment level might be lower. About 26% of the population are aged 11 and below for reading attainment, whose first language is not English. That makes it much more difficult. And in general, just having emojis scattered through. So the training says, if you use emojis, that's okay, but limit them to between 1 and 3. Chuck them at the end of your content. So if you've got a social media post, they're popped at the end, and be really, really clear about the meaning of that. You know, make sure this isn't open to interpretation. Now, that isn't about adding lots of extra things in and doing lots of things differently. It's about taking away. So the barriers, the brick walls you've built into your content that make it difficult for people to access that, to understand it and engage with it in a way that works for them, you've just removed them. So it's not about extra work. In fact, it's less work because you don't have to find all the emojis you want. So that's a really, really simple one. Adding alt text to images is another really simple one. This is something we absolutely should be doing. So alt text is just a description of an image. Again, really useful for people using screen readers. I'm increasingly seeing people add this into the body of social media posts they're putting out. Median Sarah Millican does this. She says, here's an image description for all you blind and visually impaired smashers, in her kind of tone of voice. And it's just a really nice thing to do. And she's doing that, I think, to show people that it's really easy to do and encourage others to do it as well. This is something that I build in not just to my work comms, but to my personal comms as well, because why would I just do it in one place? I want to give equity of experience to those people who are visually impaired, and there are a lot of them. The RNIB estimates, we're into the millions here. We're not talking about a few people. So, build that equity of experience in. Now, top tip I got from a couple of training sessions I went on, which were run by disabled people and blind people in particular, have said, when people have said, I don't know what to include in a picture, I don't know what to put in the alt text. Imagine you're on the phone to a friend and you've got a picture in front of you and you want them to get a good mental image of what that picture is. If it's a funny picture, you want to get across the humour. If it's an inspirational, aspirational image, you want to get across the feeling that evokes. It's not about putting every single detail in. It's the why you want that person to know about that image. Why are you using it? It's been useful actually looking at putting alt text on everything that we do, because that's made people think about, actually, why am I using this image?
Right. Yeah.
So there's an extra kind of layer in there that we weren't planning on, but has been really useful too. So describe it as if you are on the phone to somebody. Now, if you're a little bit nervous about this, just start off doing it in a simple, basic way, and then build. This is about equity of experience. allow that person who's visually impaired to experience that image, but in a way that works for them, and that's with a description. And again, if you want to learn more about that, the absolute experts, of course, are the Royal National Institute for the Blind. Follow them on any social media channel, and they give top tips about this stuff all the time. They are amazing. But these are things that are easy to do. It takes seconds to write some alt text for an image. It doesn't take a long time.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing to say, it's not a tip about a thing you can do, because there's loads of them, and I would literally just sit here for hours and hours, which is not what we're here for. It's to approach it in a steady, step-by-step way. It's really easy to look at this and think, I've got so many things I could and should be doing. Just start off slowly. My mantra, my team have all heard me say this repeatedly, is progress, not perfection. Take it a step at a time. So say you're going to cut out using 5,000 emojis in every social media post, and do that consistently for, I say 9 to 10 weeks. And the reason I say that is because that is roughly 66 working days. And I read some research recently that says it takes 66 days to embed a habit. So I'm taking that as and everybody always remembers that in the training as well. It's one of those little kind of nice nuggets that you can drop in. So for 9 or 10 weeks, just do that. Don't do anything else. Do that. And it becomes habit. It's muscle memory. You automatically do it without thinking about it. Then give yourself a note in your Outlook calendar or whatever you're using to plan your day to say, right, now I'm going to start doing alt text, and I'm going to do that for another 9 or 10 weeks until that feels like a natural part of your day to day. And that's the way to build up.
You build it steadily without it being
Absolutely. You do. I mean, I'm asking all of the services that we work with in the council who run social media accounts to embed this over the next 6 to 9 months. We've done it in corporate comms already. We've taken our time. We've worked out how to do it. And we've got more than those two things. We've got lots of things that we're doing. And there are still more things that we need to do. Again, it's about progress, not perfection. If you try and do everything all at once, it becomes overwhelming and you'll struggle and you'll feel defeated, and nobody should. Small steps to get where you need to go. What's the old saying? A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, or something like that. Yeah. I will cliche to the nth degree here, but it's absolutely true. So don't try and do everything at once. Take it a little step at a time. Do little bits. Build up to it. There are lots of resources online to help with this. And I'm always happy if people want to reach out and ask me. I will, as you can tell, wax lyrical about this forever. But it is such an important thing. And if, taking emojis out can make a difference to your messaging, reaching more people and being engaged with more positively, why wouldn't you do that? No. Adding alt text in so that people can experience an image who've never been able to experience an image you've shared before. That's an amazing thing that you're doing. And it's a hugely beneficial thing. And it helps you feel good, and it helps people you're trying to reach get what they need as well.
I think underpinning this, you've said when we were speaking before we hit the red button that you sometimes wonder if communicators have really considered the audience at all. Can we just have a look at that, what you meant there? Because it kind of underpins what you've just been saying, doesn't it? And sometimes, a lot of it is unconscious. We kind of communicate in the style that we either see a lot of or we're accustomed to. So it's interesting, this conversation. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this will be going, oh, that's interesting. But what do you mean about this not considering the audience?
So I do feel like I need to kind of go back and caveat that a little bit, because that sounds incredibly harsh and judgmental, which is absolutely not where I'm coming from at all. I have nothing but respect and admiration for people working in PR and comms. It's often a thankless and very misunderstood sector of the world. Anybody working in public sector communications in particular has my love and admiration, because I've worked in public sector comms now for 20 years this year, and it is increasingly difficult. Often people have no idea what we do. They really, really don't. And we're also operating in a sector where everybody thinks they know how to do our job, particularly if they've got a Facebook account, then anyone can do Facebook, and then they start doing it and realize it's a lot harder than they think to do it strategically. So I just felt I need to put that caveat in, because it is really important. I think what I meant by that was that we are very time poor, certainly in public sector communications, but I imagine even in private sector, you are trying to deliver lots for not very much money often, and in a very tight time scale. And that means we sometimes have to shortcut what we do a little bit. And quite often the bit that seems to get shortcutted is the audience consideration. And I will always go to people like Professor Anne Gregory, who is really clear that once you've set your objectives, your audience is absolutely key. Doing that analysis on them, understanding who they are, not just the channels they're on. And I think this is the shortcut bit. I think we quite often will say, okay, so this is the demographic we need to aim at, and these are the channels that they're on. So that's where we're going to put our content. And we don't think about necessarily how they're using those channels, what their attitudes are. Are they going to be looking at that content? Are they going to be interacting with that at a certain time of day when they're harassed? Is it going to really resonate with them? And I think there's lots of comms that go out, including from us on occasion, which doesn't think about that human element enough, about the why we're saying what we're doing. Simon Sinek is, absolutely amazing in this, is always start with the why. And that is the emotional connection bit. And if we shortcut understanding people, we're going to really struggle to get that emotional connection. And this is where I also think the accessibility stuff comes in, because if we're not thinking about the audience and their potential needs, then we're around that, then we could quite easily miss out on some of the things that we're doing and just not realise that we're creating those barriers in experience and accessibility. Not sure if I was very articulate, that answer.
No, I think you really were. But I think if you could talk to me perhaps about a particular campaign, maybe, like let's go down the case study route, that shows this approach in action. That if you cast around your 20 years doing this kind of work, are there any kind of projects that you've been involved in that you look back and yeah, we really nailed it there?
So I'll go back 20 years to how I came into the council, and I've worked on lots of campaigns since then where we've talked about human behaviour, but this one was kind of my first love in the council, and I'll always have a soft spot for it. And I came into the council as the fostering and adoption service marketing manager, and came in with a remit to recruit foster carers. There was a secondary remit to retain foster carers. We had a steady stream of foster carers leaving to go to independent fostering agencies. Children were being placed with these what we call IFAs, and it was costing the council lots and lots of money. And children were often being placed out of cities, so it was more disruptive for children as well. And I came in with a marketing plan ready to go, but wanted to really understand the human dynamics behind all of this before I did that. Just as a kind of aside to that, I grew up on my council estate in North Wales next to my auntie and uncle who were foster carers, which is another reason I think this has got a particular soft spot for me. So I saw the reality of being a foster carer in action next door. And so I kind of put the marketing plan that I had aside And the first thing I did was went out and talked to foster carers, our existing carers, and I talked to staff within the service, but the foster carers, about what were we doing that they thought worked really well in terms of recruitment and support, and what could we do better. And that gave me a whole load of new messages that I needed to think about getting out there. These were people that we wanted to recruit. We wanted to recruit people like the ones we already had in place. And we didn't want the ones we had to keep leaving. So, addressing the elephant in the room, why were they leaving? What was the problem? Now, foster carers, in my experience, are not motivated by money. Agencies were paying more money. That's not why they were leaving. They felt like their own children weren't necessarily being recognised at events and activities that were put on or looked after children. They felt that they could really add something to the recruitment process, and their interaction with that was really limited. And what was very clear from talking to foster carers who were inquiring into the service was they really wanted to talk to people who were doing it, and particularly those with kids. They wanted to know how it affected their kids. They wanted to understand the impact on families. What were the good bits? What were the bad bits? And foster carers will absolutely tell you all of the things that are not bad, but then they're not going to sugarcoat being a foster carer. But they're also the people who can bring that real human connection and sell what being a foster carer is, because it's about that feeling of literally changing lives. They don't think that's what they're doing, but that's absolutely what they're describing. They are superheroes who walk amongst us, but they don't feel like that. And so I made some very small but significant changes to the marketing that we were doing, which moved foster carers from being behind the scenes to very much being upfront. We went out to where our audiences were. We weren't waiting for them to come to us. We went out to Asda and Tesco, and we had stands there. Again, sounds like it's a really simple thing, but it wasn't advertising in newspapers and out of home that was costing thousands of pounds. It was taking time and going to our audience. Crucially, having foster carers stand side by side with social workers who were, according to all the research we had, perceived as being a bit kind of big brother is watching you, and they'd be supervising, and showed that they were people as well, and they were lovely, and they were working side by side, arm in arm with foster carers. We did some of the kind of above the line advertising stuff as well to back that up, but we had stories of foster carers. We talked about our staff. We told the human side of fostering. And I had a target. I think I gave a figure of about 40. I think that was about right. It's 20 years ago, Tony. You'll have to bear with me in terms of numbers. But it was about 40 to recruit. And we absolutely smashed that. We almost doubled that. But the bigger impacts were that we put a whole load of support in for foster carers. We arranged at events where there was an event that we ran called Bag a Book Day, where looked after children got a book token. And we gave all of foster carers' own kids a book token as well. It was like 10 quid each child. It was tiny. It was about £1,500 extra versus 1 million we were paying to independent fostering agency placements. Foster carers loved it. They thought it was brilliant. We introduced a recommend a friend scheme. They got a payment for that. Again, they were convincing people. They were telling the story for us. I kind of sat back. I didn't have as much to do because they were doing my job for me. Yeah. But it was bringing the human element to it. That, if I hadn't have understood the people behind it, both those who were working in social work, those who were foster carers, those who were potential carers, those elements wouldn't have come together. The biggest impact for me, though, was that we were able to reduce the out-of-city placements. And then if you looked a number of years ahead, we were able to evidence positive outcomes for looked after children who were able to stay in city, less disruption, better educational outcomes. So you've got better financial outcomes because we're not spending as much in agency placements, but better outcomes for children. Literally, comms helping to change lives. How many of us can say that in our day-to-day work life? I probably can't anymore. That's part of why I miss working in fostering. But anybody who ever says to me that comms, marketing, PR cannot make a difference, PR and comms people absolutely are making a difference every single day, quietly getting on with it, doing work like this and other things to boost visitor economy and tourism and recruit carers and all sorts of other things. Public sector comms, private sector comms and marketing people are also heroes who walk amongst us in a different way.
Excellent. No, for those who aren't watching this, you should have seen Louise's grin as she was telling that story. So that was perfect. Many of our listeners work in public sector comms, and I'm wondering if there's kind of one key aspect of the work that you do that you could pass on to them as a top tip.
Oh, you might have to narrow that down for me a little bit, Tony.
Well, I'm thinking in terms of like one thing that they could perhaps be doing differently tomorrow to make sure that their communications is a little bit more accessible and effective. I mean, we've talked about emojis and we've talked about putting the audience in the frame as well. But is there any kind of go-to thing that you pass on for them?
So I'd have a little look at what you're doing now, I think is the key thing, because you can't make any changes unless you know what changes you need to make. Go and read my blog on LG Comms website. That's a good start. And just kind of review, am I doing what I need to be doing? There's a number of kind of bits of legislation to guide you with that. The web content accessibility guidelines are a good starting point with some basic stuff that you can take into all of your comms, not just web and apps. Longer term, I think making sure you're building accessibility inclusion into everything that you're doing. And that sounds quite glib again, but even down to your recruitment practices. In Sheffield, we've really changed our recruitment practices organisation wide, and we've very, very much embraced that in the comms team. That's meant that we've gone from having a comms team that was largely very female, white British, middle class, to being much, much more diverse, not just in terms of those things I've just mentioned, but in terms of their background, attitudes, and so on. Part of that has come from having a recruitment practice which is really, really open. So making sure we've got flexible working when you're recruiting, making sure your job advert is clear and that is all accessible and inclusive and uses plain language. There are loads of plain language checkers out there. Start using those. That's a really quick tip. And building that in, so you're sending out interview questions in advance for people to have time to digest, a bit like you kind of suggested these are the areas we'll talk about. It takes the sting out of it. It helps people to prepare and feel more confident, so you get a much more rounded version of them in interviews and somebody who is much more likely to fit with your team better. So you're getting somebody who isn't just good at interviews, but they're good and they're able to be more of their authentic self in that process as well. And I think, just explaining what a recruitment process will look like in a job advert goes a long way. Again, lots of guidance out there on inclusive recruitment practice from LG Comms and the LGA, which anybody can have a look at. You don't have to be public sector, but that makes a huge difference. We've seen that where people have got different lived experience, again, going back to that kind of self-motivation and understanding and empathy, it will enrich your office dynamics. It will enrich your content that you're creating as well. And the approach that you take. We've got all sorts of different weird and wonderful approaches and perspectives that make up our team now. And that's a really, really good thing because we get a whole load of different ideas for any one campaign or piece of work that we're working on. So really think about that. Think about what you are doing. If you want to look at it from an individual perspective, think about how you're speaking and do a little bit of self-examination of your own internal biases as well. That was a real eye-opener for me. We've all got them.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how accessible, inclusive, EDI focused you are, everybody's got their own internal bias. So, start to be a little bit reflective of what you're doing, what you're saying day to day. There will be language that we all use that we could change. I do it on an almost daily basis. In that training, I talk about not saying things like, I've had a crazy day. It was absolutely mad. That's not great language to use, actually. It's stigmatizing around mental health. There will be people potentially listening to that going, no, it isn't. That's absolute tosh. But it is. And in this country, we have a real issue around stigma with mental health. It's fine to be physically ill, but mental illness, we get a little bit touchy about. So again, reflect on who you are and reflect on the people around you. Is their experience the same as yours? It's just, again, about that human connection and understanding other people and showing empathy.
You've talked there about there being kind of a challenge to that, and I want to kind of shift things forward a little bit and talk about that's out there now about EDI and inclusive language and privilege in today's political climate, and how can we as PR professionals navigate these sensitive areas, alienated audiences, or upsetting stakeholders or various other groups. It seems like where there was once consensus that we were heading in the right direction, we're now in more choppier waters.
It's a really tricky one to navigate, and not one that I think I can properly, fully answer, because I definitely don't have all the answers on that. We increasingly, and anybody who's involved with communication where there is public interaction, or even in your own personal kind of social media interactions, we'll see people talking about being woke and making comments like, you can't say anything anymore.
Yeah.
There is definitely a group of people who are feeling disenfranchised, and probably quite a big group of people as well. I'm not sure if, so you said at one point we felt like we were heading in the right direction. I think that very much goes to your perspective and point of view of what we're saying and where we are now.
Fair point.
I don't necessarily disagree with you on that either, but I also think from an audience perspective, it's understanding that those people are genuinely feeling that they are disenfranchised and they're not being listened to and they are not being represented and reflected. And we need to better understand that. Now, I'd love to say this is how we do it. Literally, the meeting I had before this one was about how we engage with communities and how we better respond to this. I think if we react in a way that says, just to mention flags, for example, which has been very high profile recently, just because somebody displays an England flag doesn't mean they are a racist, but that's the rhetoric that is being shared. There's a really lovely old chap who lives down the road from me who I think is a veteran, and he's flown the Union Jack for as long as I can remember because he's proud of his heritage, and that's absolutely a lovely thing. It's fine to be proud of the country that you live in. He's taken his flag down because he doesn't want to be considered to be a racist. That's quite sad that he no longer feels he can be proud. Now, is that just because a group of people have put flags up and we've said that they are racist? Is it because they are racist? I don't think it's a black and white. And I don't mean skin colour. I don't think it's a black and white issue. I think there's just 50 million shades of grey in this. And we need to really understand why people are feeling like that and properly have those conversations. I don't know that it can be resolved with comms. I think we can help be a bridge to that and help with some of those conversations. But it goes to how society is kind of created, and again, day-to-day language that we use, and policies and all sorts of other things that are well outside of my control.
I think before we came on air, you kind of warned me not to call you an expert on air. Why is that? And why? What do you think expertise does look like?
Yeah, I did, and I've called a couple of people experts, I think, on this call.
Yeah.
The irony.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very personal thing for me. So, in general, I think I see the word expert being bandied about by a lot of people who will then subsequently not back up that expertise with what they're saying publicly. I'm not going to name names, so please don't ask me to. But there are a whole load of people who will say they are experts in marketing, they are experts in social media, they are experts in whatever it may be. There are definitely some people who I think are subject matter experts, and they spend a huge amount of time researching what they're doing, understanding, again, that whole kind of system of the piece of the world that they want to be an expert in. I think of people like Andrew Bruce Smith around communications and AI, Stephen Waddington and Sarah Waddington actually around PR and comms. And, I can name many, many others. I won't go into that at this point. But it's something that just gets used too much for me. And I guess there's also this thing where, for me personally, I will get introduced as being an expert in digital comms or social media. Alex McFarlane, who I work with in LG Comms a lot, is a director of comms down in Brighton, not Brighton, sorry, she in Slough, and she will introduce me as an expert, and I cringe, and she says, "I know, I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to do that," but that's me not feeling that I am an expert. On a sliding scale, I might be compared to somebody else, but in my own scale compared to other people, I'm not. So it's a very personal thing.
We'll let the listeners judge, because I think a few might be disagreeing with you now, and on my side. Anyway, one thing that you can't disagree with, earlier this year you were recognised in the Women in PR 40 over 40 list. What did that recognition mean to you personally?
So it was a really lovely surprise. My Welsh comm sister and longtime friend and raver, she dragged me up to a rave in Newcastle earlier this year, which was amazing. Leanne Hughes, who you've had on here before,
yeah,
is
friend of the pod.
She absolutely, she's a friend of everybody. This is one of the beautiful things about Leanne is she knows everybody. She is very well known in public sector space. She used to work in public sector. Now she's doing amazing work for Can Digital. She nominated me, didn't tell me until it was a done deal, because she, I suspect, knew that I would argue, no, there are other people more deserving. You should be nominated. She nominated me. One of the things I love about Leanne, and is part of what motivates me day to day, is helping people be lifted up and boosting their confidence. I try and do that in my work day to day with my team, with the wider team, with other people, with the work I do outside CIPR and LG Comms and others. Being nominated was like somebody, and then being added to the list was somebody saying, "No, you're doing good work too, and that should be recognised." And I had a bit of a wobble because I hadn't realised the level of amazingness, which is not a great adjective, but like the women on this list are phenomenal. And being added to 40 over 40, which is run by Women in PR, they used to do it. It used to be 45 over 45. They changed it to 40 over 40 because research came out that said so many women were leaving the profession because of ageism they were experiencing from 40. Previously, they thought it was 45. So it's a reflection of that. There weren't very many public sector comms people in that list. I think there were maybe half a dozen of us. And I was probably working at the lowest level. They were all people who were directors and so on above. So I definitely had a moment on the day that that list was published of thinking, I don't belong here. I'm not as good as those people. And Leanne messaged me from her holidays and said, own it. I know what you're like. You will absolutely be doubting yourself at this point. And it did make me kind of reflect quite a lot on the work that I'd done and take time looking at the amazing work that other women had done, and felt like a really amazing thing. My best friend said to me, you've reached the pinnacle of your career, so maybe it's all downhill after this. I hope not. What I do hope is in future, I would love to see more of these fabulous women working in public sector comms being recognised in that list and in other lists. I think public sector comms people don't put themselves forward. They don't ask to be nominated. They quietly get on with things. And there are people who are doing fabulous jobs. I go again to, they are superheroes who walk amongst us. And it's often with no credit or recognition. So, I feel like I sound like a cheesy Oscar kind of. I wasn't able to go to the event for the 40 over 40, so maybe I'm getting it out now.
Yeah. I think we'll allow you the platform. I just want to take issue with your friend saying that was the pinnacle. Clearly, a PR in the real world is got to be the pinnacle. I think finally, as we wrap things up, I'd just like to understand kind of what drives you to keep pushing for better and for more inclusive comms and just, really keeps that fire burning for you.
It's that thing I've just mentioned. It's watching people improve, watching what they do improve and seeing the results and the impact of that. I did a Chartered Management Institute course a couple of years ago where we had to reflect on our own values and motivations. And it was that was the big one for me, was lifting people up and helping them to do better. When I delivered the accessibility training, and I'm mentioning that quite a bit because I'm in the middle of another round of doing that, I see people coming in at the start with arms folded going, oh, this is going to be really difficult. I don't know anything about this. This is going to be tough. And then just really getting into it and going, oh, no, I can do this. Is great. This is definitely doable. And you see light bulbs going on. It's the light bulb moments that when I see people going, I get it. Yeah, I can do this. This is great. That's what drives me forward. And then when I see them doing that in comms and I see the public and our audiences responding to that positively, that's what drives me forward. It's a really simple thing, but that's my biggest motivator, I think.
Well, in fact, I think that's a fabulous place to leave it. Louise Gibson from Sheffield City Council with the world's longest job title. Thank you so much for joining us today, and more power to you as you go forward.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me, Tony.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to PR in the Real World. If you've enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you could subscribe to the podcast and leave us a quick review. Your support really helps spread the word and reach more marketing and PR professionals just like you. And don't forget to share this podcast with your colleagues or anyone who'd benefit from the insights we share. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time for more tips, strategies and real world stories from the PR frontlines.